Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of Play Again. I have Jensen from EVOS on again as the coach, as he's already clarified, not the on-stage coach, but a very important coach within the organization. Some may argue that I've had him on again in such a short period of time to garner more clicks because of his name. Obviously, Jensen, very clickbait, but from where I'm going, I actually really appreciate his opinion, and I'm happy to have him on because he kind of tells me up front, this is what I want to talk about, this is what I find interesting, and that's really useful for me. So, the premise of this episode is going to be a bit more centralized, talking specifically about how the meta has evolved and the bottom lane in particular, and just generally the idea of does bottom lane even matter, because people are talking about top laners, people are talking about mid laners, people are talking about junglers, and I think that the ADCs and supports have gone a little bit under the radar. So what is your opinion based on the quarterfinals and the group stage of how the bottom lane meta has evolved just on a general level?
Well, I think we have to go back to when I last came on the show. We were talking about setters and solvers, and we had RNG and Flash Wolves as people who were setting the meta. And you're playing these Kai'Sa kind of theme comps, and Kai'Sa was almost to the point where you would see the can I buy a vowel and I would like to solve ban Kai'Sa kind of scenario. But now we're in a scenario where there's even a Reddit thread that said that the real reason why Eastern teams are losing is because they're over focusing on Kai'Sa. So there's a lot of conversation about how well the mid laners have been doing, and that definitely has to play a part in terms of how much priority that they're getting on the map. But I still do think that the overall game dynamic at the moment is very largely shaped by the AD carry that you choose, because that will determine the conditions that you need in order to win the game, and then what you draft in the top lane and what you draft in the mid lane then give you the tools in order to fulfill that as whichever win conditions that's determined by the AD carry that you kind of pick.
I do agree. I actually think that the AD carry picks are more determining the win conditions of the team than the other picks on the map, because how the AD carries want to play out the game is actually very different, which is a weird situation to be in given the traditional identity of the AD carry as 3-4 item team fighters, because if you have Tristana, if you have Zaya, if you have Varus, if you have whatever, you want a very different game, and I feel like this has been a little bit under discussed. Would you agree or not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, ever since the start of the summer split, where they removed the AD carry, and then you had all these teams playing Swain, playing Heimerdinger in the bot lane. I mean, G2's still playing the Heimerdinger right now. I mean, we joke about the whole Donger kind of thing, but I'm actually not surprised if we didn't see a return of Swain. Or actually, I was even a little bit disappointed that Africa didn't pull out the Swain at all in the series against Cloud9, and they went for two games of Kai'Sa. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I definitely do agree that the ball lane is where how it kind of sets up the conditions of what needs to be done in order for a team to win. And I think Kai'Sa is going to be the first thing that we really need to break down, because this seems to be the champion that's kind of shaped things ever since she has been released. She doesn't really build like a normal AD carry. She builds this very weird kind of thing. In fact, now at Worlds, we're still seeing two builds of Kai'Sa. One where she builds AP and into double defensive items, and one where she builds the Storm Razors into Runans for lots of AoE damage as well. So we have to break down what exactly is Kai'Sa. Is Kai'Sa your traditional AD carry? Is she a very specific combo piece that RNG was kind of working with? And how has that changed? And when we saw Kai'Sa at MSI, this champion was obviously super broken, and people are playing Kog'Maw to bully her out of the lane and have this longer range throughout the later stages of the game. So what are the adaptations that have come through to demote Kai'Sa from this very dominant pick, which she has been throughout most of ever since she was to now, where if you pick Kai'Sa, you have this chance that you
It's a little weird overall seeing the Kai'Sa priority coming out of a lot of teams. I feel like, especially in the first game that we have on the docket to talk about, which is the KTIG Game 4, Kai'Sa was a bit of an unfortunate champion. I think that teams, like, the weird thing about Kai'Sa is that she can be so powerful as the game extends, but in the early game there's a specific kind of way that you have to play around her to make sure that she gets to a point where she's successful. Is this something that you agree with also?
I don't necessarily agree with that.
Okay.
Kai'Sa late game, it actually kind of depends on what's the build you're going for. Now, when we saw RNG pick up Kai'Sa early on, they were not going for the crit build. They were going for the AP build for Kai'Sa, and they used it like a combo piece where the idea behind the Kai'Sa was you played this kind of pick composition, and the way Flash Rules and RNG played it, they played it like a pick composition where they would hit the two item timing. And using the two item timing, they'll find one good pick on the opponent, get the Kai'Sa to immediately reposition into the fight, so that she would either guarantee the pick or be able to translate whatever setup they had into a second pick and then get an objective off of that. So you had this Kai'Sa that was very loaded into one big burst of abilities once the rest of the team had down or had won the fight effectively already. And Kai'Sa would capitalize onto that and be able to snowball one fight into one where they would be able to do very substantial damage to the opponent. And then as the thing evolved, we started to see the crit would come out, and that's more towards the MSI Kai'Sa, where you would see Kai'Sa being played as this hyper carry of sorts. And while I do agree that the early game for Kai'Sa has always been a weak point of hers, and it's something that has been exploited ever since MSI, it's even more so pronounced over the course of nerfs that she has received in the summer season. And at Worlds, we are starting to see this early game Kai'Sa. It almost seems to be the big pain point for teams that are playing her, especially when you are not able to cover for the Kai'Sa from the mid and jungle position.
So the thing about I did review some of the pick bans while you were talking, and there have been games where Kai'Sa won, like G2 RNG 3, and I think KT EDG 3 as well, or not KTIG 3. So there have been games in the quarterfinals where Kai'Sa has won, but those specific games, I think that the way that teams are playing around Kai'Sa is the Kai'Sa has, obviously you can go Stormrazor early on, and that will be a good one item spike for her. But at the same time, she's much more potent if you're investing a good 3 items into her. And she almost requires you to kind of play towards that side of the map, in my opinion, because her all in at level 3 is very strong with a high CC support like an Alistar or something along those lines, and you can get really good catches and just get her to a point where she's much more ahead of the opponent ADC. But before that, she has a lot of susceptibility, a lot of issues, and if you aren't having Kai'Sa and you aren't setting up the map correctly with vision and everything else, then if you don't have her with a lead, she becomes really ineffective, really awkward to play. And I think that in this kind of meta that's been evolving, teams will be afraid to go for her, or understand that if they choose her, then they're all inning on a lane that might not even carry them through the mid to late game, because mid and jungle, or excuse me, mid and top have a lot of picks that can kind of be self-sufficient and just win the lane 1v1 on those events, and then they get a good item spike and they can just kill a Kai'Sa really, really easily. And then this pick becomes very, very useless as the game progresses.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you with that. But I'm going to rephrase this. So when we
Sure.
talk about why Kai'Sa has failed, so here are my 2 reasons why Kai'Sa has failed, or why teams have not been able to utilize Kai'Sa well. The first is that it requires too much investment to her in the early game. And then to kind of rephrase what you said about the mid game and the late game, the team fighting execution with Kai'Sa is not like your other AD carries where you hit the item spikes and then you just fight back to front. Kai'Sa is, and I think we especially saw this in the EDG Fnatic series, where you want to be able to split the opponent team up and then have Kai'Sa suddenly fly in and get these picks to really cripple the opponent. But what we saw in the EDG versus Fnatic game, that's where they managed the first part of it well, but the second part of it was where they kind of dropped the ball, and then we saw, I think it's kind of a meme at this point, where iBoy flies into 4 people and immediately dies. So the team fighting management is not as straightforward as, say, a Jinx where you let it scale. Yep, 3 items Jinx, just a move towards the opponent's base and you got the game.
Yeah, of course. I agree. I think Kai'Sa is a pick that requires a lot of vision and a meta that doesn't have Tracker's Knife and things like this. So it's an interesting situation to be in. What do you think of the Tristana answer, which came out in a lot of these games, particularly KT versus IG Game 4? What do you think about this pick into the Kai'Sa?
So while Kai'Sa was so dominant throughout the first portion of Worlds, I was constantly wondering to myself, where is Tristana? Because in the LPL playoffs, that was the other tournament where Kai'Sa went on this amazing losing streak. Whoever will pick Kai'Sa will lose in the LPL playoffs. I think you're much more familiar with China, so you would definitely know more about this than me. But the pick that was being picked into Kai'Sa there was Tristana. And it's the same idea as Sivir, which I think might even be a better answer than the Tristana against the Kai'Sa in the current meta. But anyway, back to Tristana, is that you have the early push Kai'Sa and you are safer than her, and you at the same amount of items. Well, yes, Kai'Sa gets access to a very strong item spike. You have the longer range, so it's the same Kog'Maw versus Kai'Sa thing, but safer for you is easier for you to execute. So you're just kind of better than Kai'Sa at almost every stage of the game, except for I think at the 2 item timing window, and then that's only if Kai'Sa goes for the AP Kai'Sa kind of build. But if they go for the Storm Wizard kind of build, I think that the Tristana just outclasses the Kai'Sa throughout the entire game.
I think that Kai'Sa is kind of the ideal pick to bring Tristana back into the meta because obviously, if you have a decent support matchup, then Tristana has basically a free lane. Tristana can scale to the point where she outranges the Kai'Sa very effectively. She can get to the point where, with the damage that she does to turrets, she just kind of takes over the game. She's taking top bottom turret, she's rotating, she's taking top turret, she's taking mid turret, and we've seen this used by a couple of teams. KT being one of them. Obviously, Fnatic really loves their Tristana, so there are a lot of those situations. I think LPL's favorite answer to Kai'Sa is actually Xayah, which we'll definitely talk about as time goes on. But Tristana for me has been a sort of underrated pick in terms of teams trying to answer the Kai'Sa, because Tristana can just actually, even if she has a really poor trough in the mid game, she can accelerate the game really, really well with turret pick. She's almost like what Caitlyn used to be, somewhat. If the enemy team has a scaling AD carry, you pick Tristana, you take the turrets, you move around the map, you overcome what used to be her trough, and you can all in early on if you have the right support. Like, I think, for example, Syra Khan, good answer from Tristana and Alistar. You can all in and get a kill level 3 if you have your jungler nearby. And so for me, Tristana has just kind of become the superior Caitlyn, much more safe, can move and kill turrets really fast, and just you kind of lose your map against a Tristana at a point, and then during her mid-game trough, you just can't really approach Baron. You can't really do a lot from the vision control that a Tristana team can establish.
So, I mean, I think we're kind of jumping all over the place, but that seems to be like a prediction for the future as well.
Sure.
Is it? Do you think that we will be seeing lots of Tristana in the semifinals? I know Fnatic loves the Tristana, so I definitely do think we're going to be seeing Tristana in at least one game between Fnatic and C9. But how about G2 versus IG?
So, obviously, for Fnatic versus C9, I feel like Reckless is the best AD carry, or at least the most consistent AD carry left in the tournament, who's been doing the most work for his team. When Caps maybe has a poor performance, he ends up stepping up a lot and controlling team fights very considerably. So for me, Tristana is a huge pick for Fnatic. If you're C9, you're considering a Tristana ban even. But for IG versus G2, I think that actually in spring, when Hjarnan would play these sorts of picks, I considered Tristana bans when my team would go up against G2. And because I think that Hjarnan, even if he's not the best ADC overall, Tristana provides a lot of safety for him. So if he does something where he approaches the waves before they meet, he can step back, and then he can still have a very, very long range to have an impact during team fights. So Tristana is actually not the worst power pick for G2. I don't think that's something that they'll go for, but I think it's something that could definitely show up if IG prioritize something like Kai'Sa, which we've seen them do throughout the tournament. I think that Tristana is really not a bad answer in that case. So,
Because I brought it up because I think that there's this other champion. I mean, I talked about Sivir being in my opinion, a better answer to Kai'Sa than Tristana, and you also brought in Xayah. You also mentioned Zaya, that's the LPL's choice of champion, and then, in fact that was the champion that we saw ever since World started, where Kaiser was at the forefront of the meta. People were running Zaya into Kaiser throughout, and that has changed, and we are seeing more Tristana and Sivir being played instead of the Zaya. And to me, these three champions are kind of the same class of champions. They're your very standard front to back AD carries. It's just that they have a little bit of difference in terms of flavor, terms of what they can bring. The Zaya is better at disengaging and engaging. Tristana is really good if you have this all-in team fight composition where you can just get the resets off and clean up a huge team fight. And as for Sivir, I mean, there's the 500 CS building win condition. I think that these three champions, they all push the Kai'Sa in the early game. They all scale decently well, and it's not to say that the Kai'Sa will outskill these champions. And I think that they're all positioned well to do better than the Kai'Sa at the moment, and that's kind of why we're seeing an increase in these champions and why Kai'Sa has kind of fallen off in terms of win rate. But Sivir is another champion which I wanted to ask about because Sivir is, from my knowledge, is a very good matchup. It's not a very good matchup, but it is a winning matchup against Tristana in the fact that you can get the spell shoe off on the passive proc from the Buster Shot. They call the Buster Shot, the exploding minion. You
Yeah,
can get
yeah, yeah.
you can get mana back from that, and you get the pushing wave against Tristana as well. Especially if you have a 50-50 support matchup, or even if you have a winning support matchup in that scenario.
In Europe, we definitely considered it to be kind of a laning phase counter, at least to the extent that Sivir is super safe. And I think that we're seeing more and more Sivir at this tournament because Sivir kind of embodies what an AD carry should be in the meta, in my opinion. You have a lot of utility to allow your solo lanes to succeed. You have a lot of clear, so if you want to play out the midsection in the 1-3-1, you're really happy. You can easily sort of be safe in the early game with your spell shield, with a good support carry, and just kind of hide under your tower if it's completely necessary, but also push back in a lot of cases with Ricochet, with Q. So then when it gets to the super late game, you can be an amazing insurance policy because obviously at this point the 500 CS Sivir win condition is a bit of a meme. For me, Sivir has always sort of been the champion that does too much. So when she's in the meta, I think she's ridiculously easily the most overpowered thing ever. But in particular, I guess in these kinds of games, against Tristana, which is what your question was, I think that she is a good answer, except for the fact that if you get to the late game point, Tristana will always be the better pick because of her range, because of her safety, because she is a bit of an unfair champion at 3 to 4 items, and that's where I feel like Sivir almost loses her 500 CS win condition to Tristana, but no one else.
Sivir against Tristana in the late game. I guess it kind of depends on what the rest of the team comp is as well. Because Sivir is this very unfair thing that even if your opponent has Barons, you can still clear the wave, and that's super irritating. But Tristana does have the long range. Once she gets like level, is it 13 or 14, somewhere around there, when it hits the 30-minute mark, the Tristana starts to have this very ridiculous long range, especially when she gets the rapid fire cannon. But before we go into the games and so that we can get things a little bit more started, let's establish the rock paper scissors dynamic over here of sorts. Okay. Where now if you're saying that Sivir is better than Tristana, there's this other champion that was played a lot by RNG and also Sneaky played it quite a fair bit, also known as Double Lift's pocket pick, Lucian. We are seeing a resurgence of Lucian. It was Lucian when it was played in the play-in stages, especially when Gambit and Supermassive were playing it. Everyone was wondering, oh lol, this walkout team, they're playing Lucian because he's good at skirmishing and all they know how to do is skirmish. But we are seeing a re-emergence of Lucian, and to my knowledge, that is a good pick against Sivir.
Yeah, I can see that because you can clear wave pretty effectively. You can bully most lanes. I mean, I feel like Lucian is just a good pick into X in lane. It's really, really safe with the E-dash. It has a lot of power with Q. It trades extremely well. Like, you do not want to be against a Lucian in general if you're laning 2v2. So this is how I feel that the pick has come into focus. And so in games where you're getting a lot of pressure from your bottom lane and you're allowing your top lane to do whatever and your support is facilitated to roam with the jungler to the mid lane and get mid lane ahead, then Lucian becomes a really strong pick. And that's sort of where I see the difference between C9's use of the Lucian and RNG's use of the Lucian, is that RNG focused a lot on getting the Lucian ahead for the sake of itself, whereas C9 really wanted to use the Lucian to give priority to the support to facilitate both the jungler and the mid laner. And that's really where this discrepancy in this meta lies, is that how is your AD carry facilitating the other lanes, and how is your AD carry operating before you get to the late game? It is really kind of where you are thinking about setting up these comps and how they're playing out.
Okay, so now that we've kind of covered the AD carries that are being played, I think we're living out Varus at the moment.
Yeah.
But let's just contextualize it, and we'll make today we'll ask ourselves a question at the end of today. Is there going to be, now that Kai'Sa has been dethroned, everybody has been first picking Kai'Sa and Kai'Sa has just been moved all the way, but now that Kai'Sa has been dethroned, are we going to see another AD carry rise up as the premier AD carry for this Worlds?
Honestly,
and
I
then
think
we'll explore that as we go along.
yeah, of course. But my initial thought is that if there is going to be one, it's going to be Sivir. But, you know, obviously anyone who's followed my Twitter for a fair amount of time kind of expects that. So we'll keep talking.
Okay. So at the moment, your status is on. Since you stick something out and you said that it's going to be Sivir, I'm going to pick one, and I'm going to pick. I actually really want to say Sivir too.
Okay.
Let me just quickly flip through my notes. And let me see if I can make an argument for Lucian to be okay. I'm gonna make an argument for Lucian to be the premier AD carry pick for this meta moving forward, and that the team that wins Worlds is the team that understands how Lucian sets things up. Okay, so now we're into this exploration as to who is the best AD carry to move forward, and your argument for Sivir is that she just does too much, safe skills, and she can and she's a late game monster, right?
Yeah.
And here's my preliminary argument for Lucian. He dominates the laning phase, which gives early access to things like dragons, as well as very, very strong Rift Herald, and being able to bully out the Sivir matchup, and you can play him aggressively, where if you get a good matchup like against Sivir, you can really bully that and then enable to take a very fast-paced game. Or if he falls behind, or if you do not get a good matchup, and then you play it the same way that C9 does, where you just use him as a safe pick to enable the support to roam and facilitate the other parts of the map. So that's going to be my reasoning as to why I think Lucian will be the premier AD carry. You can blind pick him, and you're not worried about getting counter picked, or you can pick him into the Sivir and get an advantage out of that. And I do think we do have a few Sivir versus Lucian matchups, right? I think RNG versus G2.
Yeah.
Game 4 is a Sivir versus Lucian matchup. Okay, we'll get into that later. Shall we get into IG versus KT first? And let's continue to do the post-mortem as to why Kai'Sa has been so sad. What is even Kai'Sa? A stack of bone? Like, she's human, right? She's the daughter of the void or something, right?
She's human. I guess she's Cassidon's daughter. She's made it far into the void fighting against monsters, so I guess we're just the next monster in her path as she decimates whatever she's decimating. But anyway.
Not much at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, as we alluded to earlier, this first game is Kai'Sa versus Tristana, between KT and Invictus Gaming, and we have Tristana versus Tom Kench, Tristana with Tom Kench, and Braum and Kai'Sa. I think this is actually a really interesting matchup because Braum and Kai'Sa are actually really strong together, in my opinion. Braum is the only support that can really prevent Kai'Sa from just getting extremely bullied by non-AD carry picks. And then Braum, obviously, if you're going in as Kai'Sa, Braum has a lot of utility because he can gauge off of that. He can do a whole bunch in team fights coordinated with Kai'Sa. Meanwhile, you have Tom Kench, which I think is just kind of the premier lane bully support right now. If you're restricting yourself to tank supports. So I think that that's where I see this matchup going forward, and I actually think that the fact that Tristana came ahead in this matchup had a lot more to do with Tom Kench than Tristana herself.
So for my notes on this game, I actually when I talked about reasons why Kai'Sa failed earlier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I actually dropped the balls that I felt that they did not allocate enough resources to helping the Kai'Sa lane. They played Kai'Sa the same way that they would have done an Ezreal, Xayah, or Lucian, where they just played her as a scaling pick in the bot lane, so that you could lose the lane, but in the later stages it's going to be okay because you have a stronger team fighting, and they wanted to allocate resources to the other parts of the map. So to me, the way that this was broken down was because of the 1v2 that Smap had a top lane, and that
Right.
created this very large time investment that IG had on the top side of the map, whereas KT saying that, okay, we are able to take either side, and then now that you have wasted all this time on the top side of the map, our bot side's winning, we just continue to enforce the matchup, and they take the bot side turret, and they get a very large tempo lead, and from there IG starts to fall behind, and KT successfully snowballs off that. That's kind of my notes on that game.
Yeah, I think if Tristana gets out of a laning phase uncontested, then she just takes over the entire map. And that's kind of the awkward moment, especially if you're pairing her with a Tom Kench. There's almost nowhere that Tristana can't be at a given moment, and it makes it really easy for her to surpass the gold hump that she needs to get to 3 items and to just be the most threatening champion on the map. I agree that IG are not going to be a team that ever distributes resources to getting their ball lane ahead that much. I think obviously there were earlier series and earlier games against Fnatic, for example, where they went and they intelligently ganked bot and they snowballed bot and they shut down Fnatic's only real resources to impact their mid lane. But overall, I think that IG love to make sure that mid lane and top lane are ahead. And especially in this case where you're having an issue where your top laner is subbed out, you're putting in Duke, and you want to make sure that he feels confident. He's going to be able to carry in the place of the Shy, and then Smeb outplaying them kind of 1v2 really kind of screwed up IG's whole game plan and let the Tristana take over the game.
I think that this is where I want to introduce some terminology as well. Is that
Okay.
champions like Kai'Sa, it kind of creates what I call polarized matchup, where you have where when you look at a team composition, you know you have to allocate resources to one portion of the map. So teams like Flash Wolves, as well as I think RNG to a certain extent as well, these are teams that almost exclusively play polarized team compositions, where you look at a draft and then you're always gonna have a tank top laner whose only job is to sit there, be it MMD or Hanabi or Let Me. They're gonna sit there, defend, and soak up pressure on the top side of the map, and they're going to spend the rest of their focus controlling mid jungle and controlling the bot side river to make sure that they can take control of the map. Whereas the way that the Korean teams have always liked to play is they play in what I call a non-polarized style, and we see Africa attempt that against Cloud9. Africa is the most blatant example of this, where they will draft in a way where we can attack either side of the map, and then they will pick stronger scaling options in the mid and jungle that would not necessarily be so strong. So you would see them shy away from things like Xin Zhao in general. They would prefer picking like the Oriana Sejuani type of team compositions, and then they would race you on the other side of the map. So you could get mid and jungle priority, and then you can choose where you want to go with that priority, and we will go to the other side of the map. So that's kind of how the Koreans tended to play. And I think we've talked about how Tracker's Knife has. I think people have talked to no end about how the removal of Tracker's Knife has limited this play style to a certain degree. But I think that's important to note here as well in terms of understanding how is it that teams kind of play, and we have this concept of polarized team compositions and non-polarized team compositions.
Just to clarify, when you refer to polarized team compositions, you mean compositions that are really kind of one note, and you have to have X get ahead for it to succeed, or do you refer to teams polarized being that okay, you could have pressure in one side of the map, but you have to focus on pressure in the other? Just Curious.
I would just say that it's one where if you look from the mid and jungle perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you play against a polarized team composition, you know that the control of the, the map is going to be on one side. It's always going to be playing around the bot lane. It's always going to be playing around the top lane in the case of actually it's very rare you see polarized towards top lane simply because of the way the turrets are and the fact that you have more people in the bot lane in general. But the point I'm making is that a polarized team composition is one where you have one lane that exclusively is just stood to sacrifice, and that lane is never going to get it's going to get barely any resources in terms of help from the jungler. Or that's the way the team composition is
Okay.
designed to move forward. To say if it's one note, I mean it's like introducing
Yeah,
a
there's a
term to
difference.
describe a term, right? So
Yeah,
I guess you could say
there's a difference.
it
Yeah.
is one note.
I would say that the difference between what you're saying is polarized team is what I would describe as a composition that, just playing to priority, right? Where you know you're going to want to focus specifically on this side of the map, and this is your priority. This is your where you're going to get your tempo. This is where you're going to get your success. And then what I described as a one note composition is a composition that has one condition for success. If X condition fails, they just fall apart. So that would be my difference in definition. So I think that what you're describing is more the priority type definition that I would consider. So
Okay, cool. I mean, I think ISA composition do we use polarized or one note? Which terminology should we go with?
it really depends on what the rest of the map is in terms of whether or not it's one note. So, for example, I think IG like to have priority top and priority mid. So they like to have pushing mid and top, and then have a Kai'Sa that can kind of scale. But I think that's an incorrect use of the Kai'Sa. Is just a champion that sits there and scales. So I would say that probably Kai'Sa compositions are more that you should be diverting your attention from top and mid to get Kai'Sa ahead, even though Kai'Sa doesn't necessarily give you a lot in the early game. I think that's the biggest problem with me for Kai'Sa in general.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that Kai'Sa, is that when you see Kai'Sa and a Kai'Sa comp is drafted correctly, it should be a one note composition.
Sure. Uh, hmm.
And IG
Yeah,
failed
kind of.
to have that. That's why it kind of like fell apart in this because the draft is like, here's the thing about bruisers in the top lane is that in exchange for falling off later, they tend to be. I mean, I think Aatrox and Urgot they're kind of nuts, but in general, champions like Renekton, they have always been strong in the sense that you could play offensively towards them and you could play defensively with them as well because they're just tanky and they're hard to dive in the early game.
Yeah. I don't
So
necessarily disagree, so.
yeah, I do think that this I mean I just want to retract the statement that I said that this was a bad draft. That I do think that IG it is a draft that could have worked with the Kai'Sa, but the priority was placed wrongly. Yeah, so it goes back to your analysis. Now we've gone full circle, yay.
So for me, that's where I go with this being an awkward draft overall. And then in the mid lane, you had the Urgot versus Syndra. Syndra should be able to push pretty effectively, but Urgot always has kill pressure. So for me, the fact that you have top and mid being a bit contentious, and then bottom lane requiring jungle pressure is a problem inherent in the draft.
Okay, so now if we were to change something in this game, what do you think we could have possibly changed from IG side? I mean, other than so at the moment, if we are going to go back and play again this game, right? And from IG's perspective, this the only change we make is to tell Ming to focus on the bottom side of the map instead. And even if we did that, do you think that this game would have been very different?
I think that if you focus on the bottom side of the map, then you still have a situation where Aatrox doesn't necessarily win out in the lane. So for me, the thing that I would change is you have an Aatrox Kai'Sa rotation on the first side of IG for the first part of their pick ban. I think that if you're going for Aatrox, you're assuming because they first picked Urgot that will be a top lane matchup, and then Aatrox can do very well. But I obviously Urgot can flex. Obviously Aatrox can flex, so you should be aware of that. And for me, having an Aatrox Kai'Sa rotation really kind of limited where they were going to go with that. So I would prefer that they kind of not do that. Go for Aatrox and Braum, maybe. I think Aatrox and Braum is not a bad rotation at all, because I think there are a few picks that are good under Braum. Obviously, you can still go Tom Kench, but Braum will give you so much agency to construct the rest of your composition. Braum can catch out anyone in a pick comp. Braum can win most lane matchups if Tom Kench is not involved. Braum can go forward if you're engaging with Aatrox. I think Braum plus Aatrox is a really good flanking setup. So if they do that rotation, then they're really prepared for other picks for other setups, and they're not pigeonholing themselves as much.
Somebody should find the guy on Reddit who was saying that the Eastern teams are losing because they're focusing on Kai'Sa, and some teams should just get him because that's exactly what he would have done as well. Oh, IG's focusing too much on Kai'Sa, so we just draft the Aatrox Braum instead of a different AD carry.
Yeah. I would change that, and I think that changes the way that the draft itself plays out, and it changes the way that the game itself plays out as well. So I think that ends up being effective.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna give IG the benefit of the doubt here because I do think that I'm gonna continue with the assumption that the Kai'Sa is a broken, it's a busted champion,
Mm-hmm.
and that I'll stick with the Aatrox Kai'Sa. Snatch dual Ps, give the Urgot, we take the Aatrox Kai'Sa. But if we're talking about changing things in the ban pick, maybe the thing that would change is not picking Syndra, and then maybe going for the jungler first, and then last picking for the top or mid lane in this case, so that you can see
Sure.
their full composition, and even go for a Sion as the last pick, especially now they brought in Duke, who is supposed to be the contrast. So Shy plays carries, Duke plays this more bruiser, more tanky style, more on the system of like Zitai plays carries, let me play tanks, kind of setup. So that will be more consistent with that as well. And now that you see that they've drafted the Irelia as well, we can shift the Aatrox to the mid lane and then be able to play something else. I mean, this is of course assuming that Rookie does play Aatrox, and that I do assume that Duke can play Sion. So that is how we change the ban picks, and that would set up for like I said, it's much more easier to polarize towards setting up for Kai'Sa to do well.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree with you. I think that a lot of teams have. There have been a couple of instances where teams have lost last picking their jungler in quarterfinals. You had Fnatic versus EDG Game 1 as another example, where you have some of their key picks banned out in the second rotation that should have been picked early on, like the Lucian Braum. The champions that you can easily blind, and they just kind of allow those to be banned and last pick their jungler. So I think that last picking the jungler is just kind of a bad draft approach overall.
I don't think they intended to last pick the jungler. It's just that it ended up in a scenario where there was like 3 mid laners banned out in the second phase, where IG banned out Azir and Swain, and KT banned LeBlanc, and so they were probably looking at the pool of mid laners and saying that, oh, maybe if we take Syndra here, UCal doesn't have anything left to play. And probably that's a read that they made from whatever research that they have done, and that could have been the reason. It's not that they wanted to last pick the jungler. It's just that they felt that they were denying somebody's entire champion pool by going for the Syndra over there, and then KT just flexed the Urgot into the mid lane and sent Irelia top instead.
I think you can always tell rookies in the game when there are almost all mid lane bans, and that was a theme throughout the series. So I think that is something that people have to entertain when you look at the mid lane picks coming out of IG and KT, is just the sheer amount of mid lane bans. But that brings us on to kind of the fifth game of the series, where the most adaptation was met, where you see the least amount of mid lane bans overall.
And a game without Kai'Sa, so we can finally start trying to answer the question: which is the best AD carry now? Get the daughter of Castaneda off here. She's not gonna win any more games. Or she might just come back and it's like, oh, you guys were all wrong. This world is all about proving people wrong. We said that Kai'Sa was the best, and now she's the worst. And now that we say she's the worst, suddenly people figure out, and it's like, yeah, we polarized towards Kai'Sa, and then they figure out what RNG and Flashes are trying to do all along, and Kai'Sa's like the best pick once again.
Yeah, so I see you watched our last episode where we were wrong about everything. So it's all good. But the yeah, I think this game IG completely changed from first rotation Kaisa to first rotation Zaya. Zaya obviously still has options to scale well into the mid to late game, but will give you a lot of pressure as the game progresses. And perhaps they were turned off of the Zaya by the Rakan ban, excuse me. But in this game, they realized, okay, Kai'Sa didn't really do anything for us, so we're going for Zaya.
So, the thing that I don't like about Zaya is that she doesn't have the range of Tristana, she doesn't have the range of Caitlyn, she doesn't have the same utility as Varus, Ashe, and even Sivir to the certain extent. All she does is that she's a very safe AD carry with extremely sick amounts of DPS once you get into effective range. So she's very good at playing this kind of kite and re-engage. She's a very good deterrent where it's always very irritating to attack a Zarya lane. It's always very irritating to team fight when your opponent has a Zarya and you're trying to go all in onto them, especially when you don't have the tools like the on Leona combo, which is known to kind of solve the Zarya team fighting problem as a whole. So they go for the Zarya here. It could be the fact that this is game 5 and they said, okay, let's just go something that we're familiar with, and then it's like we love to play around top and mid, so let's just pick the safest or one of the safest AD carries for Jackie Love, and that's why the Zarya priority might have come up again. But she is in terms, so if like you have this stats rating kind of thing, right? Zarya is lower on the offense side, but she's very high in terms of defense. Whereas Tristana, which was picked over here, she's kind of like 50-50, and Kaisa is the other way around, where she's very good when you lead and when you're fighting, when you're engaging on the people, but when you're being engaged on, she's got like one move to try and outplay, but if you don't get it, you kind of like fall flat. Um, so that's how I would kind of frame it, and then because of that, it shapes the way that the team composition shapes out as well. So Tristana versus Zaya, I think that this is a matchup that we have seen ever since last Worlds, where it was the Ardents and Samantha, and it was these two champions at the forefront of it as well. So we're kind of back to that. And the thing is that Tristana will have a longer range, but Zaya has got a higher DPS, and it would depend if the Zaya team has got something to match or even outrange the Tristana. So we saw scenarios last year where we would have these kind of Zaya Azir compositions, or was it Azir? It was some other long range champion. I think it was Azir, right? Yeah, some long range champion in mid lane. So
Was it
something that
Zero
could poke.
Bolt? I don't remember. Uh, yeah, but some kind of longer range champion. I don't necessarily think you said Azir Tristana or Azir. Sorry,
Azir
Zaya.
with the Zaya. Azir with the Zaya. So when,
So
when the Zaya has got another long range champion together with her that could outrange the Tristana or match the Tristana in terms of range, then the Zaya team will win. Because then they will be able to poke out the Tristana team comp, and the Tristana team comp will have a very big difficulty in engaging onto the Zaya team comp because of the fact that they were engaged into the zone of feathers, and then when the Zaya pulls back the feathers, just kind of die.
I think that where I slightly disagree with you is I think that
Okay.
Zaya team comp relies much more on having an early if a Zaya team comp is against a Tristana team comp, I think that a Zaya team comp requires much more from their top and mid laner. And this comes out in terms of either crowd control, it comes out in terms of just the ability of the mid lane to kind of one shot. And I think that you have in this case LeBlanc actually kind of gets ahead, so Tristana has, even from a long range, difficulty approaching. You don't really have a good option in the jungle as Talia, even though Talia I think is a great answer to Kindred, because obviously if you put down the E, Kindred can't really jump in, can't really E in, can't really do a whole lot. So LeBlanc ends up being the overall answer. LeBlanc has the ability to just get to the back line effectively, and that zones out Tristana, even though you would think that Tristana has a great deal of range. Zaya, I think that in general her E and her ability to root is really underrated overall. I think that the reason why Zaya is getting played much more is it has a lot more to do with her rooting and her zoning than even her scaling or her safety. Because obviously her safety is contingent on her R. It's contingent on her ability to reposition sort of for free. But when she uses the roots, obviously, and she has good feather placement, then for me the difference between a good Zaya and a bad Zaya is always going to be how they use the feathers, how they set up the route effectively. And I think the good Zayas at this tournament are really, really utilizing that. And that allows them to have more free reign in a team fight than Tristana. Because Tristana has to use her jump as almost a defensive mechanism, right? It can either do a lot of explosive damage if she has the perfect setup from her laners, or it can be a free escape. Whereas for Zaya, I feel like she relies on herself a lot more to set up her feathers, to have good CC and control in the area. She has a self-sufficient R that doesn't necessarily remove from her damage. And she can take over a team fight like this, and she can play much more proactively in this sense than Tristana can if her solo laners aren't doing work. And for me, that's the big difference between Tristana and Zaya in terms of scaling. Is just that Zaya can create her own opportunities, whereas I feel like Tristana is forced to remove some of her damage from a scenario if her solo laners aren't doing well.
So I think here if we continue to talk about what's the story that IG's trying to tell the big fan,
Mm-hmm.
and if I hypothesize that the Zarya here is just a comfort pick for them, they want something that's safe, something that's within their element. This is a team that loves to play to the side lane, so we're just gonna pick same reason why C9 went for the Lucian, something that's safe in the bot lane, and yes, you can root and all of that. But here's where we look at the KD composition. And is the Tristana consistent with the story that they're trying to tell over here? They first pick the Urgot, and on the second rotation they go for Braum and Swain. Now, immediately when I look at this, I was even thinking, is it possible that they're looking at going for a Swain AD carry over here? In fact, I was hoping that they go for the Swain here in the AD carry position, because that would be very consistent with the way that the meta has been evolving. In terms of, like, we see all the C9 interviews and they're saying that, oh yeah, it's about fighting, the meta is getting faster, and the relative strength of the Rift Herald as well, where you want to get these bruiser type champions, hit the one item spike and fight around that. So you have Urgot, Braum, and Swain is very sticky champions that are good off about when you're 15, 16 minutes when you complete your first major item, and then they go for the Tristana, which is a champion that kind of wants to reach the later stages of the game, and that's where I kind of felt that there was a little bit of discrepancy in terms of the story that KD was trying to tell with their big man.
Yeah, I think that there's some merit to that because I think that Swain, when it was picked, could have been flex spot, but they picked the Scion on the side of IG, and at the point IG are thinking, okay, this is going to be top lane. Swain is not a bad answer to Scion top overall, so it generally gets priority in that lane. So it comes down to, okay, is Tristana going to be safe in this laning phase because we have top priority? Then perhaps. I think that LeBlanc actually, and the LeBlanc pick ended up doing more for the enemy team because you have LeBlanc able to deny Talia a lot of priority where Kindred maybe wouldn't be able to. And then overall inside the Tristana selection, then you have Swain, who I think is one of Swain and Urgot are two of the perfect picks to go with the Tristana composition because Urgot can reposition someone, Swain can create a massive zone area and give you a good mid game bridge if you're a Tristana. So for me, this is not the worst Tristana composition ever, and it instead has to do with kind of the LeBlanc, the Talia pick, and the fact that it opened up into the LeBlanc. It gave so much priority to the mid jungle synergy, which created for IG a very effective situation for Zaya to scale and just do well in team fights.
But I think that the scaling definitely was part of it as well, and I think that part of it is also that Jackie Love was playing extremely well in this
Yes.
game, where we saw the Zaya flash forward, and that's one of the few scenarios whenever the Zaya has the flash available for her, she actually has access to those plays where she can make a very aggressive flash play forward, to pick somebody off if the opponent makes a mistake, and then she can reset with the R after that. So that's one of the strengths of Zarya. We saw Jackie Love use that extremely well to kind of win the series for them. Whereas here's the thing where I think where we can compare things a little bit more, and there's this assumption that Swain is good against Sion, right? That Swain will have the priority against the Sion, but from my general understanding is that in AP champions in the top lane, you want to pick them into bruisers, you want to pick them into carries, rather than picking them into tanks, because the tanks, especially in the earlier stages of the game, they they just have better base skilling and they kind of should be able to push you out. I'm not I'm not an expert in this, so I think this is where our assumptions differ. Where my read on it is that you pick the Swain and then you go for that the Swain is at best 50-50 with the side, and it depends on who gets the help from the jungler more. And in fact, it's the Kindred who I feel is able to set up for a better 2v2 in the scenario, despite Talia having the advantage of the E as well, simply because it's a damage jungler and a tank top laner, and it's different types of damage, whereas Swain and Talia is the same type of damage against a tank. So that's the way I looked at it, and I felt that it wasn't very good. And we talked about the mid lane counter pick as well with the LeBlanc, and I think that it would have been fine if this was a last pick Tristana, and if we were to flip sides and KT was on wait, and they would draft this, so they would fourth pick the Talia and then last pick the Tristana to confirm that Swain's going to the top lane. I think that that would have been better, because in that scenario they would be able to know what the mid lane matchup was, and they will be able to say that you is it safe to go for the Tristana in this scenario, but they go for it blind. And I always when I advise teams, or when I coach, I always believe that on blue side you want to be playing an offensive team. So when you go for the Tristana, yes, Tristana can play offensively in some scenarios, but I'm I'm not sure if it tells a coherent story with the Urgon and the Swain. You do have I get what you're trying to say, that it is very nice that they can hold the Tristana down and all that kind of stuff. But after we talked about Tristana's Desire and how those things kind of work, you have these people running into the Desire feathers, Desire roots them, and then Tristana, yes, Tristana is doing damage, but Desire's DPS is just higher in general. Tristana's advantage over Desire is that she outranges Desire, so that's where I feel that there's this problem if we even talk about assembling the Tristana team fighting composition. So if they would have gone for a different AD carry here, if they would have gone for, I mean, I just give me a second to think about it, because I'm not even sure what's a good AD carry pick here, other than saying let's do Swain as the AD carry against the Zarya, and even then Zarya is also pretty safe against Swain.
If I changed the draft, I would probably change the jungler. Honestly, I
You change the
think
jump.
yeah, I would change the jungler.
Okay.
That's probably where I'd go in terms of draft wise, because I feel like you have Kindred, you're already opting into the not best jungle matchup. When it comes to a team fighting scenario, you have to be extremely proactive, and Kindred can still have extremely good 2v2s against you in a lot of situations as Talia. So Talia can farm fairly well. I don't disagree with that, but there are a lot of mid lane picks, especially since LeBlanc isn't banned. You banned LeBlanc in the last game, so that's something that you've been considering. But there are a lot of ways that Talia can kind of be punished or shut down for. So for me, picking Talia here is it's a bit awkward. And again, it's a situation where you are losing the game because you saved your jungle pick, not because you saved your jungle pick, but that is a factor to consider. So I think for me, it's that's definitely the more disturbing thing. If you're in this scenario where you're all inning kind of on the Tristana, I wouldn't even necessarily mind a more tank minded jungle. There isn't a whole lot in this meta that is considered extremely good. I think that if you're going for Lee Sin, actually, it's not bad. Score isn't a big Lee Sin player, but that's something that I think would not be terrible against the Kindred, because obviously level 6 the matchup is fairly Lee Sin favorable. So for me, that's something that I would consider instead. It doesn't give you as much of an opening to shut down the Talia with LeBlanc or any other type of pick that you might be considering on the table. So that's where I go with their draft. In terms of how they played out the game,
Yeah, I think that's where this game was really won and lost in terms of what happened during the game itself.
Yeah. Like, I don't even necessarily think their draft is awful, right? I don't think it's the
I
worst.
don't.
I think you can win the game with this draft in theory. But in terms of how they played out the game, I would say probably honestly devoting more resources to the bot lane isn't bad because level 2 Braum is actually disgusting. And you can do a lot with Tristana Braum level 2. So for me, considering how this composition is set out, the fact that Swain will kind of scale passively, that's something that they definitely consider with the fact that Talia will clear very fast, Talia can make something happen, and that didn't really occur throughout the game.
Yeah. And I actually think that there's a few things that IG did very well here, and it actually has to do with Ning sneaking the Rift Herald at 11 minutes because I mean I'm still going to go with my original read that this is a one item team composition from KT. That in the later stages of the game they don't really have a way to effectively out team fight IG, and then the LeBlanc's a very big threat to them. So they need to be able to snowball things in the early game, and having Ning sneak the Rift Herald away at 11 minutes was actually huge for IG because it limited KT's ability to snowball or force an issue or create a scenario where they could snowball a fight if they were able to make use of the Urgot and Swain and get a good pick in the early game.
Yeah, obviously because of the short range outside of Tristana, you if you aren't getting the Rift Herald, you can't really contest turrets if your bottom lane isn't winning. And that's really what happened to KT here is just the lack of Rift Herald made it so that if Tristana gets items, and sure she can contest her turrets and take them, but before that you have a long span of time where Zaya is going to be way more effective.
And the other note that I had written down for this game was that for it's all about assembling this 16-minute kind of team fight, but the first demonic ascension that KT at the first level 11 demonic ascension that KT uses is to find a pick on the side on the top lane for IG's with Herald on their mid lane. So that's the other part where I felt that the game kind of where of how the cookie crumbled for KT and how IG really took control of that game.
Yep. And we've obviously been talking for a while, but moving on to the next series is
Okay,
RNG
next
versus
series.
RNG versus G2,
Oh, I
where
just remembered what was the champion I said that might have been better. It's Lucian in the bottom lane would have been
Lucian.
more consistent with what IG was trying to do.
Yeah,
Lucian
I
was
don't
great with
disagree.
Braum, and it's great at one item as well.
Sure. I don't necessarily disagree. I think that the Zaya worked out for them given that Tristana was picked into the Zaya, but if they had picked something else, then I think Zaya would have more difficulty. So
Okay,
RN-
let's go. RNG.
RNGT2.
RNG.
Obviously, you've been a big champion of the Lucian. How do you feel Lucian was used by RNG throughout the series?
So this is where I have to talk about Yankos and how Yankos has impressed me as a jungler.
Okay.
And a lot of people give credit. So I'm sorry, I'm completely derailing your
Oh
conversation. You want
no
to
no
talk
no.
about Lucian, but I'm going to talk
I
about Yankos.
I'm a
And
firm believer that you can't just look at one lane in isolation and almost everything is team play oriented if a team is at the highest level. So go for it. Talk about Yankos. I think Yankos is really kind of underrated in how these games are played out as well. So.
my first big question about Yankos is that in the loading screen for the game or like in the while they have the schedule while the stream is down. Oh, it's not that the stream is down. It's like in between matches. They have like this picture of Yankov and his mouth open and shouting. It's like and his mouth is like so
Sure.
elongated. And my first question is, was that photoshopped? So if anybody knows, please do let me know. But other than that, I think that this game was, in fact, the entire reason why G did well against Flash was G2 did well against this style of play was that Yankos has consistently been able. So this is why I wanted to introduce the concept of polarized team combo or as you call it, the one note team composition. That Yankos has been very good at attacking the parts of and really making them fall behind in terms of the tempo that they need and really disrupting the kind of game plan where RNG they're playing very ball focus. So They play tank at the top lane, soak pressure, and then the rest of the map is just supposed to funnel resources into getting Uzi ahead. And G2, they are able to hang on. Let me just refer to my notes. Oh, so this game, Yankos plays the Nocturne and he's up against the Talia, right?
Mhm.
And we see the first big play that we see is in the mid lane, where there's a 2v2 that's formed by G2, and then Ming kind of ins there as well. And that's where I think that where the game is really swung open in the favor of G2's favor from that point, because they're able to get the large tempo
Sorry,
lead, and
do
then
you mean Ming or the jungler? Because obviously Ning is the jungler for IG. I'm not sure if I misheard you or
Ming, the
Ming.
support.
Okay, okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, so they fight a 2v2 in the mid lane, and G2 wins that 2v2, and then Ming comes in and donates the second kill with the perks, and that really sets the Aatrox ahead. I think that was the big highlight there, right? The Aatrox like flashing on the Talia, killing the Talia and all the stuff. But
Yes.
I think a very large part of it was the fact that Jankos's pathing in the early game it set him up and put so much pressure onto Karsa to make something happen. Because he went for the complete full clear in the first rotation, so he got both Scouter Crabs, whereas Karsa was just limited to having to visit bot lane. And here's the thing for RNG that when we talk about certain bot lane matchups, and this is the Lucian versus Sivir, so it is
Hmm.
my pick for Premier AD carry versus your pick. And the way that this matchup works is that is Lucian favored, but Lucian doesn't straight up win the matchup. He kind of like whittles down Sivir. So it's kind of like playing with a Varus lane that doesn't have the Varus ultimate, where you just want to slowly whittle your opponents off the map. And when you want to just force them to burn through the sustain, make sure they don't have any more pots, and then force the Sivir to get a bad base timing so that you can't get the BF sword and have access to the very easy wave clear for yourself. And that's what the Talia wants to facilitate in this game. And we saw a visit early to the bot lane from the Talia, and then she sees that okay, the Karsa sees that both Scar Crabs are taken, and he goes for the play in the mid lane, and then from there, RNG they lose so much tempo on the jungler. The Nocturne is suddenly 2 levels here at the Talia, and from there it's very difficult for the Talia to have any presence on the map, and because of that lack of enforcement from the jungle, the Lucian is not able to get the lead on Sivir, and they only eventually get the and in fact they have to go to continue that, where they have to lane swap to the top side of the map to kind of break the top lane open. Sorry, did I lose you in that
Oh no, no, no.
my train of
Sorry,
thought?
I was totally following you. I was just thinking for a second. But the for me, I think that the big mistake comes into how RNG are thinking about the Lucian. And I agree
Okay.
with you that Yankos's play is actually really good here. Like his idea of how he's using the Nocturne, because RNG adapted in this game from the previous game to say, okay, we're prioritizing the Gragas because G2 are using the Gragas to disengage their bottom lane, where RNG really wants to force and RNG really wants to get ahead. But their misunderstanding of how to use the Lucian is a lot of teams that are using Lucian effectively is they're using Lucian to be able to allow their support to roam and to rotate and to influence other lanes and even get if they get first turret first we're moving okay on to the next objective and just making sure that we have as much map control as possible, and that's what Lucian is good for compared to what I think that RNG are thinking about Lucian for is we're going to win bot lane really hard, and then we're going to use Lucian to carry. You know, I don't necessarily think it's the same thought process. So for me, when I see this Lucian matchup, it's doomed to lose to Sivir in the mid to late game just because of how RNG are thinking about Lucian and not necessarily because of the matchup itself. Because Sivir is thinking, okay, I'm going to absorb pressure, I'm going to be able to clear mid lane just fine, and I'm going to let my Rise, I'm going to let my Aatrox take over the game, whereas RNG are thinking, okay, we're going to allow our Poppy and our Galio to redistribute resources to our Lucian. So I
So
think
I
that
think that
that's
this
kind of a
is
fundamental misunderstanding.
I see. So this is where I have to I think I'll be disagreeing with you a little bit because of my initial hypothesis as to why I think Lucian might be the best AD carry at Worlds right now is that you can play in this style as well. And I do not disagree with RNG's allocation of resources to Lucian in this matter. And that what I felt should have been done differently is the way they set up the level one and the way they set up for Talia to succeed, to help the Lucian succeed in this game. And I think that that's where the difference should have been where the Talia has to change her putting and perhaps try to force a vertical jungling scenario where she can just focus on the bottom side of the map, and then Nocturne has to focus on the top side of the map where he's up against a Poppy, and then both teams can race and both teams will play towards their win conditions accordingly as well. Where I'm not sure how the game will turn out, because if we did change that, and I think that we would have seen that the playing the mid lane and things with this game would have looked very different. This game would have definitely looked very different as compared to what we saw, where it's just one mistake from RNG, they start to fall behind, and then G2 really snowball really hard off the Aatrox.
Yeah, I think for me, when I say Aatrox and I know Nocturne is up, my immediate response is to pick the Nocturne. Because I feel like Nocturne versus Aatrox was, for a while in the meta, kind of, and which OP is better. And for me, I always came down to the Nocturne, because obviously if Nocturne ults in a side lane as the game progresses, you're going to have a situation where your Aatrox can ult and not necessarily be completely destroyed by the Nocturne ultimate and the damage therein, but at the same time you're 1v2, right? So you're in a position where you're probably going to lose that regardless. And for me, Nocturne, because of that, was always a really good answer to an Aatrox pick. So when you get Aatrox, Nocturne, and Tom Kench, I feel like the game is kind of, whoever has the better side lane pressure wins, and RNG are really forced into a position where Lucian isn't necessarily going to be your best AD carry pick overall. Like, I think you can go for something like, maybe even a Tristana here overall, if you're going to blind something. So it's a weird situation.
So I think that this is also, we have to open up the discussion as to how strong is Lucian really, right? And earlier I mentioned that he's strong off one item, and what I was told by Slay earlier is that Lucian is very good at three items as well. That he does a lot of damage, but he does have a weakness that he's a very short range AD carry. But he's very good at skirmishes, and he is I think one of the few AD carries that can carry a side lane by himself in this meta as well. So that's those are two of the merits of Lucian and what he does bring. And Lucian, I think he hasn't been in the meta for quite some time, and I think Freak did a segment on the amount of damage that Lucian is doing now ever since he received those buffs. So how strong? What's your assessment of Lucian as a pick? Because it could very well be that RNG does see Lucian, or in fact that Lucian might very well be a carry pick as well, especially in a scenario where you're up against double short range champions. You're up against the Rise and the Sivir, and Lucian is able to get into range rather easy against these champions, as compared to a scenario where he's up against the likes of a Tristana, the likes of an Azir, where even before he gets anywhere close to auto attacking anybody, he gets chunked out already.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think Lucian can be a carry, but I think that against a lot of the other ADCs in the meta that spike really hard at three items, Lucian will be in a position where he has to win the game by two items, right? In most scenarios, if you're throwing all of your eggs into the Lucian basket. Whereas I feel like Lucian is better used in scenarios where he's allowing the support to be free and transfer pressure to the jungle or the mid, or even in some cases the top lane. So for me, that's where I see Lucian being useful, is that he's just going to smash most lanes and allow his support to be sort of the hero.
Because if we look at the RNG case in the second round of groups, especially I think there's tiebreak against C9 as well, where they also played the Lucian. They did also still play towards the Lucian style, and they had the Lucian really carry the team fights for the team for RNG. So this is where my read on Lucian is coming from. That this is a viable playstyle for them, especially for a team like RNG. That from what I see, they have a very good grasp on how to execute a team fight. And Lucian plays very well into that because of his mobility, and especially when you get the right team compositions to set up things for him, he can do very well for them. Not that we'll be seeing them in the semi. So maybe that's a point against my argument, that because RG is no longer around anymore, so we probably might not be seeing Lucian played in this way. And I think they're probably the only team that will play Lucian in this way as well.
Yeah, I think that they had a sort of misread on how Lucian works, and obviously, if you understand UZI's history when he was on Royal in the past in 2014, UZI Lucian came out and you could like every 5 seconds or something really ridiculous, and he was the most OP user of this Lucian pick. And he could take over entire games, get 21 kills in a single game, kind of Lucian players. So whenever I see UZI playing Lucian, I think, okay, this is a carry Lucian. But
But that used to be back in the day where before they nerfed all his ranges.
oh yeah,
Just before they nerfed Lucian, and
yeah,
he
this
didn't have
was
this absolutely ridiculous range on the Q and the auto attacks. It's just so hard to trade against him. But now
yep.
he's a lot more manageable.
Yeah, and like I said, this was back in 2014, so I think that has kind of colored the opinion of how Lucian works for Royal, even flashing forward into the present. So for me, it didn't really come to the point where, as I feel like Lucian does have a point in the meta and does have a purpose, it's not necessarily in the series where we see much more usefulness coming out of utility carries or Heimerdinger. Obviously,
Now
Heimerdinger
you have
didn't play
started to
it,
change
but
my
yeah.
mind. You have me convinced. I'm demoting Lucian. He's no longer my pick to be the Premier AD carry.
See.
Because especially because the team fighting is, I think it's a bit of hubris on RNG's
Okay.
part, and now you have me convinced about that. So I probably have to pick another champion, and it seems that I'm I really want to go with Sivir, but
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go with Zaya now. I'm gonna
Okay.
go with Zaya, see how this kind of like pans out. I really want to go with Varus, but I don't think any of the four teams going in will play Varus
Really,
in semis.
I'm certain that G2 will. So
Do you
there's
think the
that.
G2 will play Varus?
Yeah, I think for sure they will. So
Because I think that when it comes to picking that type of champion, they've always shown to just pick the Jin instead.
and I think, well, I mean, they did play Varus in the quarterfinal, and they did have, and Invictus Gaming famously, like Jackie Love was a big Varus player throughout the entire summer split. So I actually really believe that we will see a Varus in that series at least once. So I
Oh,
think it's a good time to just bring up the Varus, because I don't think Varus has played in any of the games we picked.
we
Actually,
did.
he
It
is. He
was
is in the
Africa versus
Africa
C9.
C9, and that is the next game we're talking about. So maybe that's the perfect transition. Let's go and let's talk about Vars, and let's talk about C9 versus Africa Game 3. So
Ooh, this game. Oh my goodness, Africa, last Korean hope. I was so disappointed. Like, in my pick'ems, so this is where I start. I like want to showboat a little bit and say, yeah, I predicted G2 to come up over RNG despite me consistently championing RNG. But I thought that Africa would win this matchup against C9 because I thought that they would start the series playing the Varus, playing the Swain in the bot lane, and then C9 would be it'll be it'll be on pace with C9 and they will be able to execute these things well. But what they did was they just went back to the way that the Koreans were very Korean, what I call the non-polarized style, where they are like just losing lanes across the board and they wanted to try to outscale and they just kind of fell apart. I think for those who haven't watched it, just go watch LS go ham on Kuro in his spot review. It's quite hilarious and also really sad at the same time if you were rooting for Africa. But that's game one. That's game two. Let's talk about game three for C9 and Africa. The bowling matchup here is Lucian versus Varus, and I think this is what we talked about. Your correct idea of how to play Lucian as a safe pick in the lane, and you just pick him to enable the support to roam.
sure, I think that for me, Varus's adaptation was absolutely instrumental, as you kind of at least hinted at, because C9 were getting run over in the bottom lane in the first two games, and the transition to the Varus pick meant a lot. And I think that Afrika maybe almost took the wrong message from this, because they ended up investing so much jungle control and pressure to the bottom side of the map. Like, I don't think I've seen a bottom lane camp so extreme in this World Championship, and it wasn't even by an LPL team, you know. So it was really interesting how they played out, and I think that the way that Afrika set up their composition, with Gangplank being one of Keen's best picks and everything of that nature, really made sense. I kind of, looking at this draft, expected Afrika to win this game because I thought that Varus would be really effective and that Keen would go off even if you didn't give him attention, which I feel like has kind of been the top lane meta going forward, is that it doesn't really, you don't give the top lane attention, but top lane still carries. And that's where I saw this happening. C9 had really smart kind of transitions going forward, and they made sure that they accelerated the game. They made sure that Nocturne overrode some of Afrika's vision setups or overrode some of Afrika's plans. So for me, this was like, okay, Afrika learned from the first two games, but it didn't matter because they didn't play well enough.
I also felt that I mean I do this read that the camp with the bot side is very uncharacteristic because I think that the camp on the bot side is what you need to do with this team composition. It's like you have a gangplank versus Ornn on the top side of the map, and what you really want to do is just leave the gangplank to farm, let him do his own thing, just get him to call on the ultimate when you're going for a play on the bottom side of the map. And what you really want to do is to bust the bottom lane turret before 10 minutes so they can swap top and then swap the control of bot side over to the top side of the map so that when Rift Herald spawns, you're able to control that side of the map. So you really want to really camp bot lane super hard so that you can beat the 10-minute timing in terms of getting the bot lane turret down. So AD carries hit level 6 at about 7 minutes, and the 7 minutes, 8 minutes, sorry, at about 8 minutes, and you have the cannon wave hit at 8 minutes and then at 9:30. So these are the two cannon wave timers that you really want to hit as in terms of a jungler trying to set up for the gank. But I think that Afrika, do correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think that Afrika were a little bit slow on this, and they only got the ball in turret at about 13 or 15 minutes, something like that. And because of that, C9 got the Rift Herald, and they used it to cash it in on the top lane turret. So it kind of evened out the lead that Afrika had on the bottom side of the map.
Yeah, I think that Azazel, for example, played extremely well with the Shen and was able to counter a lot of the engages and a lot of the alt lanes. And Zazel initiated a lot of the fights and came out better for it, even if Baby Sneaky died or something along those lines. So I think that a lot of the bleeding was stemmed in that regard. But at the same time, and obviously Shen, if you know someone is going to pick Varus or someone is going to pick a champion that's going to really focus hard on the bottom side of the map, like Thresh, for example, you will pick Shen occasionally. I don't think Shen is the best champion at this tournament, but it can definitely limit some of the impact of an aggressive bottom lane. If you have a jungler that wants to scale, Shen isn't the worst pick ever. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shen also, the reason why you also want to camp bot lane is the same idea of attacking the lane with the globals. You hit the Shen can't out. He can't out from another lane to where he is. So if you have a manpower advantage there, you continue to have the manpower advantage as compared to ganking the top lane or the mid lane as well. So those are the merits of attacking bot lane. But I felt that where this game really fell apart for Afrika is that they didn't really understand how to execute the mid game for these various team compositions, and this is where I think that teams don't like to play Varus in general because you almost have to play like the Flash rules, where you just play this very perfect and you just end the game on 4 kills. You kill them once in the bottom lane, you get 1 kill there, you take the ball in turret, then you get 2 more kills to take the Baron, you get 1 more kill, and then you end the game. Something along those lines. Sorry, 6-0 or something, because you probably get more than 1 kill on the last team fight. But that's how you have to play these type of composition, where you just use the engage threat of the Varus to slowly push in the lanes, control the map, control the rotation paths, and then pick your opponents off once you have a manpower advantage. But we see them group up for the dragon fight, take on the dragon fight, and then that's where they have a 5v5 against C9, and then suddenly you have all this single target from the Varus and Trash up against the AoE damage that's coming through from Ornn and the Sandra, and that's where it becomes very problematic for Afrika. And that's where I felt that they kind of dropped the ball, and we saw this like back and forth skirmish, and suddenly they go for the Baron, they could use the Baron. But as somebody watching this game, if I were to coach Afrika, I'll say that, why are you guys going for the Dragon? Your focus is on the top side of the map. That's where the next set of objectives should be. The Dragon doesn't matter to you guys. The Inferno Drake, scaling is not part of your game plan. The Inferno Drake is not what you're looking for.
I don't necessarily completely agree because I think that Africa actually get a lot off of the Infernal in terms of having the bars and the GP. And I think that the fact that they have such an aggressive bot side of the map and they have Gangplank able to passively sort of contribute means that in theory Dragon should be theirs, right? It does make sense for them to go for an Infernal and play that composition out of that. I actually liked Afrika's composition because of that, because it should represent everything that has been good in this current meta, is that top doesn't necessarily get attention, but top scales and does well as the game progresses. Bottom gets a lot of attention, but its usefulness sort of expires unless there are certain champions picked, and then mid allows your jungler to do whatever and to make all of this happen. So for me, this is what was a little bit of an awkward thing for Afrika, but just the way that they set up their team fights and the way that they worked out, it felt like Keen was 1v5ing in so much of the series, and it still felt like that in this game. So, I mean, a lot of the way that they set up vision around dragon fights, I think, really came to a head. And they lost out more because of this kind of execution than because of compositionally they misread where they were wanting to go.
Well, I think I have to agree. Infernal Drake definitely is worth something to them, but it's in the context of what else is available on the map and how they have been setting up so far. So they take the ball in turret, they swap top side. So where the strong control of the map is. So this comes into my understanding of how you have to play these kind of various compositions, is that you will have priority on one side of the map, and it so happened that when the Infernal Drake was up, Africa's priority was on the top side of the map, which is away from the dragon.
Sure.
And they have to push that. They have to control the top side of the map, and that's why I was saying that they should just give up the Inferno Drake, because that is not where they're strong at. This is not how your team composition was set up in terms of division. If the Inferno Drake was part of their priority, then they should not have swapped up. They should have continued to keep the Varus or at least the mid lane and the bot lane within on mid and bot, and continue to have the Gangplank on the top side of the map. But they swapped it already. Gangplank was on the bottom side, and that's where the weak side of the map is. Because the Gangplank is just going to put barrels down and clear the wave. He's not going to contest vision. So that is why I was saying that Afrika should not have gone for the dragon.
Yeah, okay. In the context of that particular part of the game, yes, I absolutely agree with you, because yeah, absolutely. I have nothing else to add. So
Okay, cool. So that's us. Oh, the part then the Korean team got out macroed by the NA team, or I don't know. I think they just out macroed themselves. So perhaps this is just a team composition that they were just not very well practiced in, because this is a team that always likes to. I mean, I'm just gonna use my old terminologies. They're used to playing this kind of non-polarized team comps. It's like what they played in games 1 and 2. Play for scaling, play for the later portions, and suddenly they need to be proactive on the map, and they pick the fights in the wrong places, and they get punished as a result.
yeah,
So I think that's where the problem was for it. But I still do think that Varus is a very strong pick. It's just that it comes with a caveat. It's just like how Kaisa, she all these conditions to succeed. Varus also needs a list of conditions to be there, especially in the mid game. The early game Varus, he's also one of the more insane lane bullies. We talked about how strong at bullying Lucian is. In case you have not been watching any League of Legends for the past 2 years, Varus is an even more disgusting bully in lane. Like there are AD carries that trade using auto attacks, and Lucian trades very well when you can get into his range. But Varus can trade with you with auto attacks because of his W, and he trades from a distance as well because of his E and Q. So he is one of the most obnoxious champions to lane against.
and I think Varus is a really good pick because it provides a lot of the things that teams haven't necessarily been going for, which is just strong bottom lane and the mid excuse me, the early to mid game, where from when he gets first item to when he gets second item, and then also in general overall zoning, a lot of utility, but at the same time, I think where he falls behind some of the other AD carries is just that he's not the most self sufficient. And you need certain support picks and you need certain compositions to make him work. So you need like either Tom Kench that will give him the escape that he doesn't necessarily have in his kit, or you need the Braum that gives him a lot of protection. So for me, Varus is not seeing as much play as something like a Sivir or Isaiah or uh, other things like this, or even a Lucian, because obviously the E, because he's just not as self sufficient overall as some of these picks. And that's where, as you said, he falls into some of the same bins as the Kaisa.
Well, actually, this is something that I've been wondering. Why is it that you don't just pick Varus and then people would, oh, we gotta deny the Tahm Kench away from him, and then you pick the Zyra, you pick the Vel'Koz, you pick the Karma, you pick a mage support along with the Varus, and you absolutely destroy that lane so hard. Because that used a strategy where you just pick the Varus and then you bait the opponent picking Tahm Kench, you pick the mage support, which hasn't really been seen for some time, and we just go ham on them. I mean, I think you probably have to ban Nocturne out in order for that to happen, though.
I think there are a couple of reasons. One is that the mage support creates a very one-note composition. You absolutely have to focus bottom lane. The enemy team knows that if you're doing this, you're absolutely focusing bottom lane. Bottom lane needs to win, or you've wasted an opportunity. And second is that the tank or just the more burly support provides so much opportunity to control rivers, right? So if you have a mage type support entering a river after a back, because it's very common for supports to get the first back and then come mid or come through jungle and then try to get vision along the bottom side river. If you have a mage support, then the Alistair, the Braum is going to jump on them and kill them instantly, effectively, if you have any sorts of jungle presence or jungle aid. So I think it's just much riskier and combines your win conditions much more to play mage supports than to play tank supports. Even if you know you're going against a Tahm Kench, you know the Tahm Kench is gonna bully the shit out of you. You instead would think to yourself, I should think about the rest of the map. I should think about how top lane or mid lane can win instead of bot to make up for what Tahm Kench is going to do.
Okay, I think that's a good explanation as to why we haven't seen mage supports. Have you seen any mage supports at Worlds at all? I don't think we've seen one, right? It's been Tahm
Yeah.
Kench, Alistar, Braum all the way.
Yeah, I currently cannot remember any. I mean, obviously Rakan is the closest thing, but that's like a he's kind of a squishy engaged support, but he's a really mage support. So
Yeah, he isn't really mage support, although he definitely doesn't function in the same way that Zyra or like that was the season 6 World Championship. That was the height of the mage supports.
yep. It's a little bit
Okay,
interesting
so
because of so much damage that's on the kits, but yeah, that's obviously tank sports just offer so much in terms of macro play that I think it's almost bizarre, and it's an indication of bad game balance when mage supports get played. So.
maybe. So okay. Is there anything else you want to cover with regards to this game? I think, do we want to go more into Lucian versus Varus? And if we will be seeing this matchup, because we did mention that I think IG versus G2 is where we might see the Varus appear, and are we going to see a repeat of Lucian versus Varus, or what answers to Varus do you think there will be, other than Xayah? Xayah is, of course, the natural predator to Ashe, Varus, and
I don't think IG or G2 will play Lucian. So if there is a Varus in IG versus G2, it will most likely be in response to another aggressive sort of utility champion. I can imagine someone picking Jhin and then the other side picking Varus, or
Sivir, Varus into Sivir.
I actually think Sivir is not bad into Varus. So this
You
is
think so?
something that on H2K, obviously not the pinnacle of competitive spirit, but we always kind of considered that Sivir was something that we could have in our back pocket to pick into Varus because you could cancel some of the queues coming out, and then in addition, you would scale a little bit better and still have a really good push in the mid to late game in terms of matching the midsection of a split pushing composition or something along those lines.
I see. I think it depends if the Sivir picks teleport, and if it depends on the jungler as well, because we have to look at the item timings from the Sivir, because this is what we talk about or what I call a small item AD carry, because the various builds of can build of small items, and the Sivir she wants to get the BO slot on the first base, And if the virus can end up in a scenario where he forces the Sivir to base early and then she has to buy attack speed items, then the Sivir has a very difficult time uh, finding space into the game, at least until laning is broken. So from what I do know is that Sivir does well into Jhin, because Jhin has got limited auto attacks and just on the W and push the wave, but she doesn't do that well against the range that Varus and Ashe has, because Sivir trades using auto attacks, she trades by bouncing the W off things, whereas the Varus, and especially if you do get a good support matchup, especially if the opponent has like Varus Stunkench, it becomes very, very difficult for the Sivir to play the first 5 minutes of the game. And if you can double that down with a jungler gank that can prevent the Sivir from buying the BSO on the first base, you end up in quite a lot of trouble as a Sivir. That's my understanding of the matchup.
I can see that, but I still think that Sivir's first item is actually even better now with Storm Razors and stuff like this, and she has a lot of flexibility in her build path in that regard. And if your team is really focused on solo laners, which I feel IG, both G2 and IG are, then that will be a situation where, regardless
Yeah,
of
I guess
Sivir
so.
or Varus, then you can make the Sivir side really, really work, and then the Varus is just completely shut out in the mid to
Yeah,
late game.
because in that case the Varus doesn't get the early gank to kind of limit the Sivir.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right about that. You're right about that. So if it is in the context of G2 versus IG, I think then the Sivir is definitely a very high. It might even be a very high priority pick in that case.
I haven't really
Oh, you're
seen.
you're you're winning this. You're winning this. Sivir is the best AD carry
It's
right now.
insane. Yeah, I think Sivir is really underrated, but I think obviously you said you wanted to say Sivir, so I can't take complete credit. But I think that IG aren't really a team that will pick Sivir, so that could
They'll go for
even.
Zaya, right?
Mhm.
They'll go for Zaya, which is what I kept flip flopping to. So now I want Zaya. So now we have to find a way to convince ourselves that Sivir is better than Zaya.
So if Sivir or Xayah is the best way to carry, watch G2 versus IG is the takeaway. So, but I do think that, yeah, I think G2 will pick Sivir, but I don't think IG will. So that could be a factor to consider. I think that, though, if you look at these teams, IG will make Xayah work better than G2 will make Sivir work, if that makes sense. So you could still see IG having a really, really strong sort of Xayah game, because I think Jackie Love has had a lot of inconsistencies, but when you get to the game fives, when you get to the okay, my team is out of the tournament if I don't perform, he's done extremely well in this game five, and he's stepped up considerably from where he was in the LPL Spring Final to where he is now, and he's slowly getting over some of the stage right elements. Maybe KT is the last obstacle he has before he realizes, you know what, I can do this. So we'll see how that works.
I mean, we started off by saying that the bot lane is kind of what determines the meta, but if we're going to see a Sivir versus Zarya bot lane, and I think especially in the context of G2 versus IG, it's not going to be the AD carry that determines who wins the game. I think it's going to
Sure.
be, I think this matchup, why I had IG, why I think IG is win is because it's going to be a skill contest between Rookie and Perks, and it's going to be a skill contest between the Shy and Wonder, and I mean, it's really hard to say, but just looking off of how things have been played so far, Perks has been impressive, but Rookie has been phenomenal. So I just feel that in terms of skill contests, IG will have the edge, and because of that, they will be able to come out ahead, unless somehow, some way they play Duke instead of the Shy, and then that shifts the dynamic a little bit, and then G2 might be able to win in those scenarios. It's not that G2 would never win. It's just that if you're asking me to pick a winner between these two, and the skill contest, if you ask, is 60-40 in the favor of IG solo laners in most it it's a 60-40 in the favor of IG solo laners. So I think that this game will be determined by the solo laners, and um yeah, it's just 60-40 in the favor of IG. So that will compound on itself.
And this comes back to what you mentioned, being Yankos being sort of an underrated factor in the G2 series against RNG, is because I think that Yankos' defensive play against Gragas is just if you want to play against G2, there are just so many picks. So which do you prioritize as the most important? And the fact that Gragas can constantly disengage the midsection, Tom Kench can constantly disengage the midsection. For me, in my mind, it's you can devise a strategy that allows you to play against Heimerdinger. I feel like it's really hard to devise a strategy at this point that allows you to play against Tom Kench and Gragas. Just a consideration based on the games that we've seen from them so far. Obviously, Heimerdinger is the more intimidating pick because it hasn't lost, you know. But at the same time, I feel like just being able to constantly disengage the midsection in a 1-3-1, it's something G2 relies on a lot. And if you come to the table, as IG sort of did against KT with a grouping team that spikes earlier, then those are the picks that you want to eliminate most often.
I don't think that IG is even concerned with that because they'll be more than happy
Sure.
to let you just pick disengage options in terms of the support and jungler. Probably they don't want to let you have the thumb catch because that gives you rotation options as well. And then they'll just make it a contest of solo laners. That's probably how I see the series panning out. So I don't think that and this is why I feel that it's so difficult for G2 because G2 they're not trying to solve a meta. They're going up against what I call a brute force team. They're just gonna be we're better than you in lane and we crush you in lane and then we snowball the game from there. At least that should be the approach when we see IG versus G2. And it's going to be very difficult for G2. It's not like RNG where oh, how do we solve the UZI problem? And I think Yankos did a great job at solving that, but they're not solving a meta here. They're looking at it like, okay, this is going to be a battle of the tops of the map, and how is you going to play towards that? If Yankos can really step up, they can find very good ways to attack mid and jungle, find very creative timing and parting. Those are scenarios in which I see G2 winning. But I just do think that it's hard for him to do that because of the quality of solo laners available for IG.
It's interesting because I see Wonder coming out ahead of the Shy, but I see Rookie coming out ahead of Perks. So I think that will be a really interesting dynamic, and because you have sort of the solo lanes being split like that, I think a lot of it will come down to how the juggler will play. And Perks has been really inconsistent. Ning has been really consistent, so it can theoretically even be anyone's game, and that's why I think a lot more pressure will come down to how the bottom lanes play out mid to late game. And so if Jackie Love has some clutch game and some clutch performance left in his tank, he could very well be the MVP of this entire series because I don't see Hjarnan having the same impact.
I mean, I think it'll be kind of unfortunate if you just see Aatrox versus Urgot in the top lane, and then it comes down to 5v5 team fights in the later stages of the game, because that is the scenario in which Jackie Love comes out clutch in this matchup.
Yeah.
And then it's like, we go back to the question, does bot lane matter? And it's like, oh, the Tristana gets all the resets, or it's the Xayah, and then Jackie Love make the same flash forward, pick somebody off, and then R back, and catch the second person kind of play again. It could come down to that.
Yeah,
if we do see the Urgot versus Aatrox in the top lane.
And if bottom lane matters, I think IG will win and Fnatic will win. So it's kind of where I am on that. So bottom lane could very well be the decider in these types of matchups, and that will give more importance to the bottom lane than what we've seen in the quarterfinals overall. So
I actually do think that, like, the more I think about it, the more I feel that Heimerdinger is actually is a secret OP pick in this matter.
Sure.
Because of the way we talked about, you're able to just control areas of the map, and Heimerdinger, the way I see it, is a very static champion. He sets it very well when he's able to place the turrets down, and if you're able to get a mid push in, Heimerdinger is pretty good at enforcing that. And the item timings as well. It actually goes quite well into what most people are trying to do in the meta right now. And yes, you're not getting a clear AD carry, but you compensate for that with extremely good objective taking power, and it's very good, especially when you're playing it in a very defensive manner.
Yeah, I think anyone who thinks that Heimerdinger doesn't scale well hasn't watched Heimerdinger really play, or a good Heimerdinger really play, because the scaling numbers that he has on his E, for example, with you combat with it as R, is just he can win an entire team fight with good RE. So, yeah, And he, of course, he pushes pretty well in the early game. He does everything almost that a good AD carry should in this meta. But obviously, he still has good counters. I think Sivir. Okay,
Yeah,
sounds
I
Sivir is an
actually think Silver
underrated pick
might be
into Heimer.
where's that right?
Yeah, no, we're talking over each other, but we have the same conclusion, right? Which is that Sivir is not a bad choice if it comes down to Heimerdinger. So you could see situations where Jackie Loves pulls out a Sivir that we don't expect him to play into a G2 Heimerdinger, and then they deny the Tom Kench Gragas, and then they're able to take over the game, and bottom lane matters. So
You think they do that game one? You think they do that game one? Straight away, throw down the gauntlet. We'll give you the Heimerdinger,
I
and then they pick the Silver.
I don't expect the Sivir. I really don't expect the Sivir out of IG. So that's kind of where I come from it. But I do think that there is a possibility that they open Heimerdinger and have some kind of counter to it planned. So.
Cool. Because I would just be so irritated about Heimerdinger. Like, you give the Heimerdinger over, and it lets them force Baron as early as 20 minutes. And so even if you want to play away from the Heimerdinger lane, and you say there's a static champion, it's not good at pushing, and you want to play to 1-3-1, and then the Heimerdinger suddenly as the Baron, it's so irritating to deal with. So I think you're going to expect Heimerdinger bans every game of the series, right?
Yeah, I think that it's just something that a lot of teams will expect, or a lot of teams will decide to do in this series or against G2. Is okay. It's way safer to just save the to just ban the Heimerdinger and not have to deal with it, you know? So, because there have been a lot of teams that have come into this and thought, okay, I have a good answer to this Heimerdinger, and it turns out they don't. So
let's talk about the other one the other matchup where I think the bot lane probably matters a lot more.
I think that RNG, or excuse me, Fnatic probably have the best bottom lane remaining of this tournament. Do you agree? Or
I think it's hard to say because
mm-hmm.
in terms of like team play, and I don't think Fnatic's bot lane has changed much. He loves Reckless loves his Tristana, he loves the Sivir. It's almost like he only plays those few champions, or rather, it seems to be his comfort go-to. He always goes to those champions and he just plays them. He plays solid, he plays stable, and a lot of things for Fnatic. The highlights to me has been Broxa, has been Caps, has been Ripple to a certain extent as well, and watching through the EDG series, it's also EDG kind of dropping the ball. Have we gone through the EDG series? Oops, we forgot to go through that.
No, I mean, we talked about the EDG RNG series. We talked about game 3 at least to an extent, or game 4, excuse me, to at least to an extent, where we talked about the
EDG.
Lucian. Yeah. Or no, EDG. Yeah, EDG.
Yeah, we forgot about that.
So, no. That's what we're transitioning into now. Yeah, absolutely.
So, game 3, right?
Yeah. Game 3 is sort of what we picked out to talk about a little bit more. Obviously, in this game, we have, again, the reappearance of the Sivir and what we talked about at the very start of the episode to pull it in full circle. Yes, the Kai'Sa.
Oh man, the Kai'Sa is I really feel that Sivir is just so difficult for the Kai'Sa to deal with. And especially in this game, what we are saying is that they had to lead early, and then the Sivir is able to just consistently push out the mid lane wave. And it's difficult for the Kai'Sa to go to the side lane as well. So they kind of allocate the Syndra to the mid lane, stop the Sivir from getting the push priority, because in the side lanes, there's an assassin there, there's a Yasuo that the Kai'Sa has to watch out for. So it's just very difficult where you have 3 champions that wants to pick up side lane farm, but you only have 2 side lanes. And that's where I really feel that makes it so difficult. But it's not, say, a loss at the point, and they have this opportunity where you really need to catch the call timings from the opponent team and be able to set up during those periods. And I think that there was a lot of flip-flopping from EDG. Like, they knew that Fnatic they wanted to take control of one side of the map, and then they flip-flopped and they went back to the other side, and then by then Fnatic was back on the map, and they went for this big team fight around Dragon, and Fnatic won that fight, and I actually felt that there was a mismanaged fight from EDG's side. So when we talk about giving Kai'Sa the resources, I felt that EDG, they didn't completely fail in that first regard. There were some blips here and there, but I think that they did some good things to recover from that, especially in terms of forcing the 5v5 from bot lane to stop them from absolutely falling behind in tempo after they lost the bot lane tier 1. And but it's the way that they execute the team fights with Kaisa where I felt that they kind of dropped the ball. And it goes back to the whole iBoy flying into 4 people kind of thing. And this is where we talk about this is what I call a pick and disengage composition, where you need to know very clearly what are your engage tools and what are your disengage tools, and that the moment you throw your disengage tools, that's the end of the team fight. And that's where I felt that they the team composition here for EDG was a Camille Syndra, the top lane was a Poppy, and you had Kaisa and what was the support again? Tam Kench or Bomb?
Tom Kench for
Tam
Kaisa.
Kench.
Mm-hmm.
So you only have Poppy and Russ abilities as disengage spells, and everything else is kind of like engage. So the moment you don't have the Poppy Copter or you don't have the Syndra E, or you use those things already, you should not be moving forward unless the fight is already won. And the mistake that EDG made over here is, other than in terms of setup, is that the moment the Syndra uses the push of the E, they need to disengage. They need to get out of there. But they continue to fight and they funnel in. Iboy thinks he can make the hero play and he gets instantly bursted. So, I mean, of course, I think the LPL teams have always been known for team fighting, but I'm just looking at this one and it feels like they really dropped the ball in terms of managing this team fight with the Kai'Sa.
Yeah, I don't think EDG's team fighting is something that a lot of people praise. Just throwing that out there. I don't think that they're the best team fighters, and a lot of their decision making in the mid to late game isn't exceptional. I think a lot of that is because EDG have the cliche that a lot of Chinese teams have, which is just prioritizing kills over objectives or movement, and not really understanding when they need to reset into play. For example, when they go for the Rift Herald to pick up mid lane tier 1 and mid lane tier 2, I feel like they drop it, they get mid lane tier 1, and then they just kind of move towards the bot side of the map, they clear a vision, and they reset. Because if they do those things, then Fnatic cannot then reclaim tempo, rally, move through mid, and get mid lane tier 1. Because mid lane tier 2 doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. If you get a little bit of chip damage off of it with the Rift Herald, that's all good. But as long as you have mid lane tier 1, you can threaten the Baron. You already have bottom lane tier 1. Really good for you, really exciting, because you have a little extra ability to gain priority in that side of the map on the opposite side of Baron. Even if your composition isn't really a 1-3-1 comp, if you don't want to play that into Tahm Kench, it's kind of whatever. But for me, it's you're overextending in this play. You're not transitioning vision when you're making aggressive picks, and this is for me the biggest problem with EDG throughout the series, is that they don't reinforce the leads they have, and they get their leads largely off of kills and bloodthirstiness and don't really care about how their map is being set up.
Well, I think that it shows itself that EDG. I actually like the way that they're approaching the meta game. They were also one of the first few teams to pick up the Lucian. They're picking up the Azir. I thought that these were interesting champions to be playing, especially when people are playing these very bruiser heavy team compositions. But now that we see them play against Fnatic, I actually felt that they had the tool, and it's actually kind of a waste when we look back at it. And I think that the Chinese fans as well as the EDG fans will feel that this was that they threw the game, or all the games were very winnable by their own regards, and they had set up in terms of like they're ticking off the checklist and then something just goes horribly wrong for themselves. And I think that's the part that's a little bit unfortunate. I'm not sure if the EDG fans are used to it by this point already.
I mean, they could be.
They never disappoint, dude. Disappoint.
I feel like EDG fans are used to EDG losing in quarterfinal, you know? So. But no, I honestly, the overall EDG played exactly as I expected them to play throughout the World Championship. They didn't necessarily do anything exceptional. They played Zabot really heavily. That's what EDG do. They had some good games. Like the first game, I think, was smart because you had Haro showing off that he can trade sides really well and then rotate over and pressure the enemy jungler again. If the enemy jungler doesn't go for Krugs defensively, then the enemy jungler is in a really bad spot. So I think that EDG played that well. They were doing some of that in play-in. If EDG didn't understand that that was going to happen and they picked as Elise with losing lanes, then they were kind of dumb. But if going into the rest of the series, I feel like Fnatic adapted well. They prevented early invades from Edward Gaming, and overall, they just had good answers, knowing that if we have our scaling AD carry Sivir in our back pocket, and we make sure that even if mid lane doesn't win wholesale early on, we have good vision around the mid lane so that he can't get completely destroyed and they can't rotate that pressure into the rest of the jungle. And if EDG overextend, we still have good defensive wards up and we can push out and get some kind of trade in return. Then I think that Fnatic had a really good answer to what EDG wanted to do. And granted, I don't think that's necessarily how C9 will play, or I don't think that's necessarily how teams left in the tournament will play, but it's, for me, a lot of people thought that Fnatic's early game was bad. But since Fnatic always kind of had a better idea, in my opinion, about how to execute how their composition will go long term, with the exception of the first game, I didn't mind the early game that much.
So now, do we move on to talk about Fnatic versus C9, since you brought up how C9 might possibly play?
Yeah,
So,
go for it.
my read on how C9 plays is that they are playing what I feel is a I'm not sure how much of it is just a reaction to the way that things have been going for them in scrims, but I think that with the strength of the Rift Herald, with the strength of champions like the Sandra emerging, all these Aatrox and Urgot being in the meta, I think team compositions that attack one item timings well would do very well in the current meta. And that is what C9 has been playing towards. That's why they're picking up the Lucian, Licorice has been playing either bruisers or tanks, and these are champions that also do kind of do well at level 11 of one item, and they seem to be attacking the meta in a way that I felt is a transition from what RNG and Flash was trying to do, and C9 has taken that and they kind of evolved it to the next level, which is more in step with the timings that are being attacked in the World Championship so far.
Honestly, I look at some of C9's drafts and I think they should lose these games versus Afrika for sure. I don't.
I only think that for game 3. I thought game 1 was a 50. Yeah, I thought game 2 they had the advantage.
Game 2, I thought C9 definitely lose the draft if Afrika lose the game if Afrika play like humans. But that's a lot to do with the fact that as the game progresses, you have good sideline options. You don't necessarily even win team fights, so unless Afrika put themselves in positions where Graves can pick them off really effectively throughout the game, which is what happened, Afrika should win that match. So for me, it was a little bit weird overall how Afrika approached that. I think that C9 got away with a lot, but at the same time, I think that Cloud9 operated really well in understanding what they needed to succeed. If you draft a Graves, you need the Graves to get the head. You know, that kind of mentality. And I think that they realized that didn't necessarily hold in game 3, which is what we went over, because I feel like they didn't really get it. Okay, they have the gangplank in the top lane and bot lane is getting forced on, so we should probably just let this happen, which I think is the better answer. But they had a lot of ideas in general in terms of what they wanted to do in that series, and I think against Fnatic, if they play an extremely aggressive bottom lane, they can make things happen, right? If they rotate the lane proactively, if they go for the top side and they transition. But I think at the same time that Fnatic won't put their solo laners in the same kinds of awkward positions that Afrika did, where they can get picked off and destroyed. And so we'll have a more competitive mid to late game series.
I mean, I if Caps goes full grow and just suddenly ins the lane for no reason, then maybe C9 wins. Because now that I think about it, the series was a lot more Afrika losing than C9 winning.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate thing. But I still stand by the fact that I feel that the way C9 is piecing together what they want to do, you could say and part of it is that is Afrika making mistakes, but the fact is that C9's team compositions is a composition that is good at capitalizing on these mistakes and can snowball these mistakes in a manner that would reward that very well, because suddenly you have control mid, you can enforce monster off the map with impunity, and then you have the Rift Herald, and I think C9's rate of taking the Rift Herald has been very high throughout the entire series. In fact, they only didn't get it. I think they got it in the third game as well, right? Yeah, they did get the Rift Herald in the third game as well. So, and just simply having access to all these kind of things limits your opponent's ability to really make the big plays that has really we have been seeing in the meta game, especially the Rift Herald taking multiple objectives at once, being able to control the neutral objectives. Um, but the Fnatic, maybe they just go for a scaling option. They go for the Sivir, they go for the Tristana. They get bullied out early, and then we could see a return of that scaling style come back into the fold for them. Because I think that that might be how the game pans out, where we have early game focus from C9, and then on the side of where they'll play a Lucian, they'll play maybe even a sneaky play Varus.
Yes, I do believe he does. I do recall him playing
Maybe
Varus. So.
maybe he might even play the Varus in the bottom lane, and then for Fnatic side, it's back to Tristana Silver all the way. That's probably how it might turn out. Then Cloud9 plays offense, Fnatic plays defense. It also could depend. It depends on who Fnatic plays. If they play SOAS or they play Blippo. I do
Yeah,
think they'll play Blippo.
yeah, I assume they'll play Bippo, and that has a lot to do with how I think the game played out, whereas top lane is just sort of passively gaining a carry advantage. But the thing for me about C9 versus Fnatic is that Fnatic's defensive vision is obviously something that's super underrated at this tournament because everyone who's just kind of brute forcing is going. But I think Fnatic, the way that Fnatic approach defensive vision is that they pay a lot of attention to plants and using vision plants to clear even when they don't necessarily have sweepers, they don't necessarily have pinks. And I think that that's something that teams won't necessarily expect or even think about. And so Fnatic get a lot more out of defensive vision out of putting wards around their mid lane, even when their mid lane is losing, than a lot of teams would. And that's something that Afrika, from my perspective, was really severely missing. And that's why I think I give Fnatic a significantly better chance than Afrika, just based on how they play.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something I should go back and watch the games for as well. Now that you mention it, it is quite an important part of the game, the way you control the plants, especially the vision plants. Uh, but I think that we have to see. I mean, it's very hard because whenever we make these statements, like the last time I made a prediction was like Flash was RNG finals, right? And that was 4 days into the World
Yeah,
Championship.
of
So
course.
it's the challenge for us is that we have to look at a slice of time, and then based on the slice of time, we need to kind of make an extrapolation. And here's the problem: when we look at metas, it's like even when we said it back then, it favors the meta setters when we make those kind of statements because we don't know if people would solve the meta or not. And I think by now we have that answer. It was kind of solved. Uh, but now, what's the state of the meta game and the spot lane matter? I think after this discussion, the answer is kind of unfortunately no. Although we would like to say that yes, it kind of like defines the way we play it, but I think that it's going to be very largely. It does matter probably in the sense that it dictates who's on offense, who's on defense. But I still do think that at the end of the day, IG versus G2, carry versus carry kind of setup, and then for Fnatic versus C9, the bot lane probably matters a little bit, but it's going to be a battle of mid jungle that determines how the game pans out. Like and picking the bot lanes is just simply how much resources you get to put into the mid versus jungle matchup. So if you get Lucian versus Sivir, then it's like what you mentioned, you're using it to enable Zazel to roam up to the mid lane to help Jensen to help Svenskeren. Whereas if they go for the Sivir, they can do the same thing as well. It's just who gets to push priority and it's how you play around those timings.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair way of putting it because overall you have situations where I think Sneaky and Reckless were perhaps the most impactful AD carries of the quarterfinals. But at the same time, most discussion is still on their solo laners. And a lot of it has to do with like how long can Fnatic make the game extend such that their bottom lane matters. And I think that that's where their bottom lane will matter. If their bottom Braum becomes a really, really high priority pick, because I think Braum was crucial to both C9 and Fnatic in their quarterfinal, and just being able to work through that lane. Tom Kench may come into play, but overall, that's where I see that going. You see the caliber of bot lanes that have been eliminated from the tournament versus the caliber of bot lanes that are still in the tournament. Not to talk shit about like Kjarnan, but I do think that that is something that is to be considered. I think that bot lane matters in a way that people haven't really thought about in a long time, because over the history of League of Legends until now, it's sort of been okay, this AD carry fits into our team composition. He has the same 3-item build as every other AD carry, and it's just all about if we team fight, then this AD carry will scale better or not. Whereas I feel like now bottom lane matters a lot more in terms of how you're thinking about how you're playing out your macro, and that will kind of determine whether or not teams get a good early game. And that is why early game seems to be king at this tournament. It's just if you understand how to play out your early game given what your bottom lane is. And Kai'Sa is a divisive figure, and this is what we started talking about at the beginning, where you have to kind of play around Kai'Sa, but Kai'Sa already also is a champion that isn't really going to pay dividends until later on in the game. I see that as a problem, and I see that as not fitting into the current meta.
Okay, I think is this where we wrap things up?
Yeah, that was kind of my wrap up statement. Do you have one? Go for it.
Well, I mean, like let's just re-answer the questions that we posed. So, bot lane, you already mentioned that it matters, but not in its own way.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about what's the premier AD carry going to be. It's hard to come up with a really final answer. We both have this hunch that I think Sivir is going to have a big impact. Um, Not because that she's going to dominate the game, but because she's just so safe and she can push the waves and she just does all these things. And will we see higher priorities on Sivir? Maybe, maybe not. And I think that it's going to be exciting to see how the meta changes, and we might even see a re-emergence of people who look back at the Kai'Sa games and say that this is how we need to fix things. But I honestly doubt that. But I mean, we could be surprised. We could be surprised. The game is still evolving, and I think that more so than ever, this World Championship, we have seen a very fast evolution of the game from the first round to the second round to the quarterfinals. So I'm not surprised if it changes moving into the semifinals as well, especially given the teams that are there. I'm actually pretty sure it would be a different meta from what we saw in the quarterfinals.
Okay,
I
thank
mean, it's
you.
definitely gonna be a different meta because we won't see Kai'Sa as much. It's kept losing all the games.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much, Jensen. And it's been a pretty good episode of Play Again, I think. So I'll see you around. Have a good time pretending to take your name back from Cloud9's mid laner. I know that that's a very difficult task
Can
ahead of
I can,
you.
can I just make a statement about this?
Yeah, go for
So
it.
here's the thing: if you're gonna call yourself like if you're gonna give yourself a name, right? So if his name was still Incarnation, and I'm gonna call myself Incarnation as well, then I guess that yeah, that's kind of my fault. But if you're gonna call yourself Jensen because your name in real life is Jensen, and my name in real life is also Jensen, so I'm gonna call myself Jensen as well. I don't think that it's fair to blame me for that, right? I don't think
No,
that
no,
it's
no, of course
fair
not.
for me to get blamed for that, especially when there's like tons of people in I think Denmark where Johnson is a surname over there, and it's one of the more common surnames in Denmark as well. But it's my first name here in Asia, so that's my gripe with oh, he's trying to get it to get more attention. Oh, he's doing it to latch at the success of this other person. Like, is there any other one else with very common name that I can't think of anyone on the top of my head, but that's my statement in my defense of why I insist on calling myself Jensen.
See, I kind of relate to that because Travis recently mentored an interviewer, right? Who is no longer being. I haven't seen her do a lot of stuff. Maybe she's still doing content or whatever. But she was an Instagram model, kind of. Her name was Kelsey, and he convinced her from changing her name to an in-game user tag, which I don't even remember right now. I'm sorry, to Kelsey, right? And so she was saying, okay, I'm Kelsey, I'm interviewing all these, and it's like I felt a little twinge. It's like she's taking my name, but that's really her name, you know. She can't be claimed to have taken my name. It's not like Travis is saying, "Ah, you're way better than this other Kelsey. You should take her name and take over the League of Legends scene in her place and just kind of stamp her." No, none of that happened. It's just her name. So, I accepted it. I took it as, you know, kind of whatever. It's as if gamers almost have this weird bubble around we can create names if we don't like our names, right? We can create new names. But at the same time, if you really, really gravitate towards a name that could be common, like Extreme Killer, then someone else who has a name like Extreme Killer isn't necessarily trying to take your identity, it's just he gravitated towards that. It's even more extreme if you're born with this name. You didn't even get to choose your name, it's just a name you've always known, a name that you've related to, a name that you've gone forward with. So I don't blame you. I probably get 1 or 2 extra clicks off of having you being named Jensen, but I'm not going to blame you for having that name when someone else does as well. So if anything, we should blame Incarnation, because Incarnation is a fucking kick-ass name and he changed it. So whatever, you know.
Yeah, I do think that was a very cool name. But maybe people are going to look at my Twitter handle as well and say that why don't you just call yourself Jupiter Storm? And it's like, yeah, I guess I have my own reasons why I just prefer to be called Jensen, and he probably has his own reasons why he prefers to be called Jensen as well. So I think that wraps it up, and this kind of clarifies it. So whether clickbait or not, you decide. Maybe we're the same, we're one the same. You might see me play for C9 in the semifinals. All Jensens are collective now.
I would be excited to see that. For a game, maybe. Anyway,
I'm actually terrible when it comes to. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Jensen, for coming on, and hopefully this has been a fun episode to watch. So.